This tutorial will talk about the lap zipper. The lap zipper only has one row of top stitching on it. So we're going to get our sample prepped. You need 2 3 by 10-inch pieces. Remember that you want to do your seam finish first because you won't be able to do it after the zipper is in. Do not cut any of your seam allowance off. We're using a 7-inch zipper. We want the top stop to be 1 inch from the top of the fabric. So once again, we are making some markings. The zipper begins at the 1 inch, and the zipper is 7 inches long. So we put a pin 8 inches down. I like to go ahead and mark my samples. So T is for top, B is for bottom. When we sew these kinds of zippers, we always want to stitch in the same direction. We are always going to be stitching from the bottom to the top. And so this will help us remember. We are going to do a normal stitch length from the bottom to the bottom pin, and then we'll back stitch. Then we'll come back to the pin, and the rest of the way up we'll do a long number 5 stitch length. We want this to be basted so that we can unpick it later. We're using the regular presser foot, and I will start with the normal stitch length. Our seam allowance is 5/8. We'll back stitch at the bottom. Remember, we're stitching from the bottom to the top. Come to the bottom where the pin is, back stitch. Come back to where the pin was, then change your stitch length to 5. Continue stitching all the rest of the way to the top. Do not back stitch. Now we're going to do something that's optional, but I do like doing it. Take your seam ripper and pop about every 5th stitch. This will allow you to unpick your basting stitch a lot quicker when we're finished sewing the zipper on. Now we need to press our seam open, so we'll take it to the iron. Be careful not to let your basting stitches come undone. Okay, this is the top, this is the bottom. For the lap zipper, we need to unzip the zipper. And then we want right side of zipper tape to right side of seam allowance. But we're only going to stitch this side first, so we need the rest of the fabric out of the way. Remember that the top stop is 1 inch down from the raw edge. This is so that when we do a 5/8 seam allowance at the top, you'll still have about 3/8 room, so that you'll have room for a closure, a little hook and eye. We're stitching from the bottom to the top, so we want our pins this direction, the point away from you. Okay, we are going to baste close to our coil. So we're ready to put the zipper foot on. Remember, this is a narrow foot. We cannot have the needle in the center position. We have to either be to the far left or the far right, and we will be switching back and forth, depending on what stitch we're doing at the time. For this first stitch, we will have the needle to the far left. This is a basting stitch. It's a preliminary stitch. We will not be unpicking this, but I'm leaving my stitch length long. We could move the slider up, but I actually just start right close to the bottom of the slider. I put my needle in the down position. Oops, excuse me. But my presser foot is close to the coil. The coil is right next to your seam line. That's very important. Go ahead and stitch all the way up. No need to back stitch. Now we're ready to close the zipper. And we move the fabric to the left, but we want to form a little lip. I don't know if you can see that very well, but from the stitching line to the coil, there's a little lip about 1/16 of an inch. You want to move the fabric right next to the coil. We'll put a couple of pins. This next stitch is permanent, and we need to have the needle to the far right. So change your stitch length by clearing, and it'll put it back to the default. We are edge stitching. That means we're stitching right on the edge, and here I start just below the bottom stop. Move the needle to the far right. Okay, go ahead and back stitch. And I like the needle in the down position. I don't like my thread tails getting in the way, so we're going to just get them moved out of the way. Once again, your presser foot is right next to the coil. We're stitching only on the lip. Try to stay steady, stay parallel. Once again, my presser foot is trying to push my fabric up, so I want to offset that by pulling it back down so it stays put. The slider might be a little bit in the way, so you can go ahead and lower it. As long as you've got your needle in the down position, you won't lose your position. And then continue edge stitching on that little lip. This is what it looks like. Just a little lip, and we've edge stitched on it. Now we're going to flip the non-stitched seam allowance over to the non-stitched tape. We want to now baste the tape to the other seam allowance. Make sure your pull tab is up. I'm going to actually flip it to this side. I'm going to move my needle back to the far left. And my presser foot is on the edge of the fabric. We want to just baste the two together. That will help secure our tape so that it won't slide out of the way when we top stitch. Once again, my slider's in the way just a little bit, so I'm going to put the needle down so I can raise the presser foot, go ahead and open the slider just a little bit so that I can continue stitching and getting the tape basted to the seam allowance. Got lots of thread tails to cut. Okay. The back is now basted on. We're ready to turn to the right side. This side has already been stitched, so we're just going to top stitch on this side. I do need to make sure my slider is back to the top. Notice my fabric tends to want to go up here. Well, I'm going to smooth that out a little bit, maybe put a couple of pins in there to help hold it in place. I do not want my fabric to skew. I want to keep everything nice and flat. You'll have to just see how well your fabric works for you. We're going to get a piece of tape to use as our template. You need an 8-inch piece. We need to see where the bottom stop is. We want to start our top stitching right below the bottom stop. We do not want to stitch through that bottom stop or you'll break your needle. Normally we would put the edge of our tape right on the edge of the seam and we can stitch along the outside edge. But there is an exception. Maybe as you were basting or edge stitching, maybe your seam allowance moved. So I always check it. If I'm going to be stitching my permanent stitch right here, I want to make sure that I'm going to catch my seam allowance. Yes, I am. But if it didn't look like I was going to catch my seam allowance there, I would move my tape. I would offset it so maybe an 1/8 inch of the tape would be on the other side. It's okay if your top stitching is 3/8 from the seam. It can be a 1/2 inch or it can be 3/8. Okay, I'm going to run out of tape, but we'll just eyeball that. We're going to stitch across the bottom. Oh, I see what happened. It didn't get lined up right. My bottom stop is right at that bottom pin. There we go. Once again, I am not going to back stitch. I'm going to leave a thread tail so that I can pull it to the back later. The needle needs to be to the far left so that the needle and presser foot are closest to the tape. Once you start stitching, you'll want the needle in the down position. That will help you pivot around the corner. Come on, one more. Okay. And then follow the tape. Looks like my tape needs to be moved just a tiny bit. There we go. The tape will really help you sew straight. That's our goal. We want our top stitching to be parallel with our seam. Notice I'm kind of pulling back. I don't want the presser foot to move my fabric forward. Just take your time so you can stay steady. I'm getting close to the lumpy slider, so I'm going to stop. The needle is down. Now I'll come underneath and I'll just push the pull tab slider so it'll open up the zipper a little bit, get behind the presser foot, then lower the presser foot and continue stitching to the top. Go ahead and back stitch. There's our lap zipper. We have a couple of more things to do. We want to secure our thread, so we'll come to the back side, find our bobbin thread, pull on it, and you'll find the needle thread. I'm not sure if I'm pulling on the right, there we go, there it is. We want to pull the needle thread through, so just catch that loop. I've got an extra thread tail there, so I'm going to go ahead and just tie it in too. Put the threads together, wrap them around your index finger to make a loop, and put the thread tail in the loop, but don't tighten the knot yet. You'll put a pin in the loop and guide the knot up to your tape and pull it tight, and then you can cut your thread tail. Then come to the right side, pull your tape off, and then start unpicking your basting. Go ahead and finish unpicking that, and you've got a beautiful lap zipper. Lap zipper works great for the center back of a skirt and also a side zipper. We put the side zipper on the left side. I would not use a centered zipper on a side seam. This opens up way too much. So this one is much more secure and closed and would work great for center back or a side zipper.